Captain Ethan Calloway heard the first shot and thought his team had finally found their footing. Then the second, then the third, and he realized with a cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air that the shots were coming from behind him, from the ridge, from the position he had ordered empty, from the woman he had told 6 hours ago to stay out of the way. 24 enemy fighters were already down, 3 left standing, and Madison Reed hadn't missed once. He pressed his back against the wall and felt something break open inside his chest that had nothing to do with the firefight. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the end, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. She had been invisible for so long that she had started to wonder whether invisibility was its own kind of power. Madison Reed stood at the edge of the briefing room at Forward Operating Base, Redstone, holding a manila folder against her chest, watching 8 men argue about a mission she had already solved 3 days ago. The folder contained her analysis, the satellite imagery, the annotated movement patterns of an enemy commander who had been playing hide-and-seek with American intelligence assets for the better part of 2 years. She had stayed up for 31 hours to complete that report. Nobody had opened it. Captain Ethan Calloway stood at the center of the room, lean and sharp-jawed, pointing at a projected map with the kind of absolute confidence that comes from years of being told you are the most capable person in any room you enter. He had the bearing of a man who had never once in his military career considered the possibility that he might be wrong. Not because he was arrogant exactly, but because the system that built him had never given him a reason to question himself. He commanded Iron Wolf Team 8 operators who moved through the world's worst places and came out the other side mostly intact. They were decorated, they were disciplined, and they shared a collective blind spot wide enough to drive a supply truck through. Reed. Calloway said her name the way people say the name of furniture. Not unkindly, just without weight. You have the updated comms grid. Yes, sir. She stepped forward and slid the folder onto the table. Along with an analysis of enemy movement patterns on the northern ridge, I've identified what I believe is a secondary firing position that isn't accounted for in the current. We've got that covered. Sergeant Dominic Hale said it without looking up. He was built like a refrigerator and had the personality to match cold square, useful in specific circumstances, completely immovable. Intel already signed off on the approach vector. With respect, the movement patterns I've been tracking over the last 72 hours suggest. Reed. Calloway's voice wasn't sharp. It was patient, which was somehow worse. You do outstanding work on the signal side, truly. But the tactical picture has been assessed by people who've run these kinds of missions before. She looked at the map, at the ridge, at the ghost of an enemy position that nobody was looking at. Yes, sir. She stepped back. Specialist Troy Myers, 24 years old, grinning the way 24-year-olds grin when they haven't yet learned what the world can take from them, leaned toward Corporal Daniel Voss and said something low enough that Madison wasn't supposed to hear. She heard it anyway. She analyzes maps. We fight wars. Voss laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter, or at least Voss didn't think it was. It was the laughter of a man who genuinely believed those two things existed in completely separate universes, and that the person doing the analyzing should feel grateful to be in the same building as the people doing the fighting. Madison didn't respond. She picked up her folder, nodded once at Calloway, and walked out of the briefing room into the corridor where the cold air hit her like a reminder that she was still here, still doing this, still choosing every single day to be the most professional person in a building full of people who would never bother to understand why. Corporal Lily Harper was waiting in the corridor. Lily was 29, a signal specialist, sharp-minded, in a way that she rarely advertised, and one of the only people on base who treated Madison like a complete human being rather than a resource to be allocated. She fell into step beside Madison without asking, which was one of the many things Madison had always appreciated about her. They didn't open it, Lily said. No. The ridge assessment. Tabled. Madison kept walking. They have their approach vector. Lily was quiet for 3 steps. What do you think is going to happen? Madison stopped walking. She stood very still for a moment, the way she always did when she was running calculations behind her eyes, a habit so old she didn't even notice it anymore. "I think the mission is going to go wrong," she said. "And I think when it does, it's going to go wrong in a very specific way, in a very specific place, at a very predictable time." Lily stared at her. "Are you going to tell them that?" "I already did." "Are you going to tell them again?" Madison looked down the corridor. Through the window at the far end, she could see the mountains in the distance, massive, indifferent, beautiful, in the way that dangerous things are always beautiful when you haven't yet understood what they can do to you. "No," she said. "I'm going to go prepare." Lily frowned. "Prepare for what?" Madison didn't answer. She just started walking again. The truth about Madison Reed existed in two versions. The version that lived in the standard personnel file, the one that Calloway had skimmed 3 months ago when she was assigned to his unit, described a sergeant first class with a distinguished record in intelligence analysis, signals communications, and satellite imagery interpretation. The kind of file that makes a commanding officer think good exactly what we need. The kind of file that in a unit of elite operators makes a person functionally invisible. The second version was classified at a level that most of the people at Forward Operating Base Redstone didn't know existed. Madison had grown up in Rapid City, South Dakota, the daughter of a Vietnam veteran who had come home quieter than he left and spent the rest of his life teaching his daughter that the most dangerous person in any situation was the one no one was watching. Her father had been a sniper. Not a famous one. Not the kind who got books written about them. The kind who came home, planted a vegetable garden, and told his daughter when she was 7 years old, and already showing signs of his particular kind of precision thinking, that the best skill in the world was the one that nobody knew you had. She had enlisted at 18 and spent her first 4 years exactly where her aptitude tests suggested she belonged, signals intelligence analysis. She was extraordinary at all of it. The kind of analyst who didn't just process information, but saw shapes inside it. Patterns that other people missed the negative space between data points where the actual truth lived. But in her 5th year, she had been quietly identified by a program that few people in the military knew existed, and even fewer had ever interacted with. The Precision Marksmanship Evaluation Program, PMEP, was not advertised. It did not recruit openly. It watched. It waited. It identified individuals who demonstrated specific cognitive and physical profiles that its administrators had spent 20 years learning to recognize. Madison had been flagged. She had been offered a choice. She had chosen. For 18 months, she had done something that almost nobody at her level had done before she had continued her intelligence work while simultaneously completing a precision marksmanship program, so demanding that its washout rate exceeded 60%. She had done it in parallel in silence, fitting the training around her assigned duties with the same methodical patience she applied to everything else she did. She had graduated at the top of her class. Her file had been reclassified. And then she had been assigned to Iron Wolf Team. Not because she was the support specialist, because she was an evaluation. The program wanted to know how elite operators interacted with personnel they perceived as administrative. Whether unconscious bias affected mission planning. Whether the assumption of capability based on gender and job title created exploitable gaps in operational security. It was an experiment, and Madison was the instrument. The night before the mission, she went to the equipment room alone. It was late enough that most of the base was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into a place the way a held breath settles into a chest dense, loaded on the verge of release. She unlocked the secondary storage case that had been shipped to the base 3 weeks earlier, cleared through channels that appeared completely unrelated to her, labeled with the inventory code of a communications array that didn't exist. Inside was her rifle. She had built it herself, not from scratch, because she wasn't an armorer, but from components she had selected with the same exactness she brought to everything. The rifle had a story in its parts the way people have stories in their scars. She had shot it in conditions that would have made most trained operators hesitate to even try. Wind, rain, extreme altitude, target distances that required you to calculate not just for the present moment, but for the trajectory of time itself. The seconds it takes a bullet to travel so far that the earth has had a chance to move beneath it. She checked it the way she always checked it, with her hands first running her fingers along every surface, not looking, just feeling, trusting her sense of touch to tell her what her eyes might miss. Then with her eyes, then with her mind. She was still sitting with the rifle across her knees, running through the mathematics she would need when the door opened and Lily stepped in. Lily stopped, looked at the rifle, looked at Madison. Something passed across her face. Not fear, not shock, but a kind of rearrangement. The way a picture looks different when you realize the image inside the frame is not what you first thought it was. "Madison," she said. "What is that?" "It's a precision rifle." "I can see that. I mean..." Lily stepped closer slowly, the way you approach something unfamiliar. "Why do you have it?" "Because tomorrow, the team is going to walk into the position I told them about," Madison said, "and they're not going to believe it's real until it's on top of them." Lily sat down on a supply crate across from her. She didn't ask Madison how she knew. Lily had worked with her long enough to understand that Madison's predictions were not guesses. "You're going to go up there," Lily said. "Yes." "They didn't authorize you to." "No." "Calloway doesn't know." "No." Lily was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is running through a sequence of decisions, measuring them against each other. "I'm going with you," she said finally. Madison looked at her. "Your signals," Madison said. "I'm a soldier," Lily said, "and I can spot." She met Madison's eyes. "You need eyes. I've got eyes. It's not complicated." Madison looked at her for another moment. "You understand what this means," she said. "If the mission goes the way I think it's going to go, and we intervene without authorization." "I understand." "We could both face disciplinary action." "I understand that too." "And if I'm wrong about the position..." "Are you wrong?" Lily asked. Madison didn't hesitate. "No." Lily nodded. "Then we go." They left before dawn. Not secretly exactly, they filed a communications patrol notation, which was standard procedure. The kind of paperwork that gets rubber-stamped without a second look, because it's the least interesting thing a signals specialist can do. They moved on foot through terrain that would have stopped most people because the ridge Madison had identified was not accessible by any route that a person with less patience would have chosen. Madison moved through it the way her father had taught her to move through difficult ground. Not fighting it, not rushing it, just finding the path of least resistance and following it without ego. Lily stayed close. She was quieter than Madison had expected, steadier. They reached the ridge 2 hours before the assault team reached the compound. Madison found her position. She had imagined it from satellite imagery and topographical analysis, and the reality matched her mental model closely enough that she felt the particular satisfaction of a calculation confirmed. Not pride exactly, but a kind of alignment, the feeling of a key entering a lock. She settled in. Lily positioned herself to her left 30 degrees off angles, calculated to give her the best possible observation coverage. For a while, there was nothing to do but wait. Lily said quietly, "How long have you been doing this? The marksmanship or the waiting?" "Both. Either." "My father started teaching me to shoot when I was 9, Madison said. "The waiting, I've always been good at waiting." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Do they know the program? Do they know you're doing this right now?" Madison considered. "They know I'd identified the position. They know I'd flagged it. Whether they anticipated that I'd take this initiative..." She paused. "I don't know. I stopped trying to guess what the program expected of me about 6 months ago." "Why?" "Because at a certain point," Madison said, "the only thing that matters is what's right. Not what's expected. Not what's officially sanctioned. What is actually demonstrably right." Below them, through her scope, she could see the compound. She could see Iron Wolf Team moving into position. She could see in the shadows at the edge of her sight picture the enemy positions that none of them had looked for. "Lily," she said. "I see it," Lily said. "All of it. Enough of it." They both watched, and they waited for the thing that Madison had already known was coming. The radio crackled. She had a secondary receiver, another piece of equipment not listed in her official manifest tuned to Iron Wolf's tactical frequency. She could hear Calloway's voice, confident and controlled, moving his team through the compound's outer approach. She could hear the way the team communicated, sharp, professional, everything you'd expect from operators of their caliber. They were good. She had never doubted that. The failure was never that they were incompetent. The failure was that they had decided well before anyone fired a shot who among them could be trusted to see clearly. She had tried to show them. She had placed the data in their hands and watched them set it down. And now the data was about to become reality. She could see the first concealed position from her ridge. 3 fighters, motionless, positioned with the kind of discipline that told her immediately that these were not untrained irregulars. They had been placed. They had been waiting. Whoever had put them there had chosen the location with genuine tactical skill. She found the second position. 4th. 6th. She counted quietly. By the time she had identified 22 of the 27 positions that the enemy had established around the compound, Iron Wolf team had entered the primary structure and the door had closed behind them. The trap had been shut. Calloway's voice on the radio still calm. "Team is inside. Beginning primary search." Madison pressed her cheek to the stock of her rifle. She felt the familiar alignment, her eye, the scope, the distance, the world beyond the glass. She felt the wind. She felt the temperature. She ran the numbers in her head with the speed of someone who had spent years making mathematics automatic, turning it into something as instinctive as breathing. 27 targets. Sequential priority. The order in which they had to fall to keep the men inside that building alive long enough to figure out what was happening. She didn't feel afraid. She didn't feel angry. She felt with a clarity that she had come to recognize as the truest thing inside her, a sense of absolute responsibility. These were her people. Not because they had treated her well. Not because they had earned it. Not because the system had been fair, or the assumptions had been correct, or the laughter in the briefing room had been anything other than what it was. They were her people because they were the people beside her. Because that was what it meant to serve. She settled her breathing. Lily said very quietly, "They're moving." Madison looked through the scope. In the compound below, she could see the first enemy fighter beginning to shift position. The trigger was about to be pulled. Not hers. Theirs. Which meant she had approximately 12 seconds before the world below her erupted into something that would kill the men she had been assigned to protect, the men who had laughed at her, who had patted her on the shoulder and told her she did outstanding work on the signal side, who had never once looked at the quiet woman in the corner and considered the possibility that she was the most dangerous person in the room. Madison Reed took one long breath. She exhaled half of it. She went still, and the mountain went to war. The first shot Madison fired didn't just drop an enemy fighter. It dropped every assumption Iron Wolf team had ever made about the woman carrying intelligence folders through their corridors. But none of them knew that yet. Inside the compound, Captain Ethan Calloway was still operating under the belief that his team had the situation controlled. The primary structure was clear. 2 rooms swept. His operators moved with the precision of men who had done this exact thing dozens of times before, in dozens of places that looked exactly like this: dusty, dark, hostile, familiar, in the specific way that danger becomes familiar when you've lived inside it long enough. Sergeant Dominic Hale cleared the left corridor and pressed his back against the wall. 2 rooms clear, he said into his radio. Moving to secondary. Copy, Calloway said. Voss, what's your position? South end, Corporal Daniel Voss said. Nothing yet, it's quiet, Captain. Calloway didn't like quiet. Quiet in a place like this was never what it sounded like. But he had been in enough of these situations to know that quiet could also just be quiet. And he had long since stopped letting his instincts override his intel, because the intel had always been solid. The program had always been thorough. His team had never walked into a situation they couldn't handle. He had 2 kilometers of confirmed mission success behind him. He did not know that he was about to add the worst 15 minutes of his career to that record. Continue sweep, he said. Voss, keep eyes on the south approach. Roger. On the ridge above them, Madison heard every word. She had her secondary receiver pressed close, the earpiece feeding her the team's tactical frequency in real time. Her left hand rested flat against the ground beside the rifle, not gripping, not tense, just resting, feeling the vibration of the mountain beneath her, the way her father had taught her a habit so old it was almost unconscious now. She was monitoring two things simultaneously: the radio traffic from the team below and the movement of 27 enemy fighters who had been sitting in concealed positions for what she estimated had been at least 6 hours. Patient fighters were dangerous fighters. Patient fighters had been put there by someone who planned ahead. She said quietly to Lily, "The south approach is compromised. Voss is about to walk past the third position without seeing it." Lily had the binoculars up. "I count 4 fighters in that cluster, 2 with heavy weapons." "3, Madison said. "There's one behind the fuel drum. He's been still for so long you'd miss him if you were scanning fast." Lily looked harder. Then, "God, you're right." Madison was already running the calculation. If the south cluster opened up on Voss, the sound would trigger the eastern positions, which would in turn draw out the ridge elements she had identified on the far side. A cascading engagement that would pin Iron Wolf team from 3 directions before they even understood they were surrounded. She needed to disrupt the sequence before it started. "Lily," she said, "ready. When I take the first shot, they're going to know there's a shooter on this ridge. That changes their priority. Some of them will redirect toward us." Lily was quiet for exactly 1 second. "How many?" "Depends on how quickly they process what's happening. Best case 4, worst case 8. Another second. "And you're telling me this now because you need to know before it starts," Madison said. "Not after. You still have time to fall back." She heard Lily inhale slowly. "I'm not falling back," Lily said. "I know," Madison said. "I just needed you to choose it with your eyes open." Below them, Voss took 3 more steps toward the south cluster. Madison found her first target. She exhaled. She fired. The sound cracked across the mountain like something breaking open, and for one suspended moment, everything below went absolutely still. The fighters in their positions, the operators inside the compound, the mountain itself, as if the world needed a single heartbeat to process what had just happened. Then it exploded. Calloway's voice on the radio. "Contact all elements. We have contact. Where is that shot coming from? Hail unknown direction. Repeat unknown. Voss. South cluster is moving. I've got fighters breaking cover. I count at least." The radio erupted into overlapping voices, and Madison was already working. Second shot. Third. She moved through her target sequence with the methodical efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times before the rifle was even out of the case. Not rushing, because rushing was how you missed, and missing in this situation had a very specific cost that she was not willing to pay. Fourth shot. Fifth. The south cluster lost 2 of its 4 fighters before they could bring their heavy weapons to bear on Voss, who had thrown himself behind cover with the instinct of a trained soldier even before he fully understood what he was reacting to. "Captain." Voss's voice, sharp with adrenaline but still controlled. "South approach is somebody is engaging from the ridge. Unknown shooter. I count." A pause, the kind that happens when what you're seeing doesn't match what you expect to see. "The fighters are going down. They're going down without us firing." "Calloway, say again." "Someone else is shooting, Captain. Someone on the ridge is taking them out." Silence on the frequency. The kind of silence that happens when a commander is rapidly reconfiguring everything he thought he knew about a situation. Then Calloway said very carefully, "Who authorized a support element on that ridge?" Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Madison fired her 6th shot and took a breath and found her 7th target and felt the mountain wind shift 2 degrees to the east, adjusted without thinking, and fired again. 7 down, 20 to go, and the compound below was starting to understand that something had gone very wrong with the trap they had set, because the first body was supposed to trigger Iron Wolf's panic, not their own. Hale's voice came back on the radio. "Captain, eastern positions are activating. I've got movement on the..." The sound of automatic fire swallowed the rest of his transmission. Hale Calloway's voice cracked for the first time. Hale report, static. Madison moved. Not physically, she stayed exactly where she was, because repositioning mid-sequence was how snipers died. She moved in the way she had learned to move when the situation changed faster than the plan. She let go of the sequence she had memorized and rebuilt it in real time, reassigning priority based on what the fighters were doing now rather than what she had predicted they would do. The eastern positions were the new threat. Hale was pinned or down. She didn't know which, and she couldn't afford to spend the mental energy worrying about which worry was a luxury she would allow herself later when the shooting stopped. She found the eastern cluster's lead position. Fired. Worked to the second. Fired. The eastern cluster had 3 heavy weapons operators. She took 2 of them before the third managed to reposition behind a stone structure that gave him cover from her angle. She noted it. Moved on. She would come back. Lily, she said. The third heavy weapons on the eastern cluster has gone to cover. He's going to try to relocate. Tell me when he moves. Copy, Lily said. Her voice was steady. Madison noticed that and filed it away. Steady under fire was not a given, even in trained personnel. And Lily Harper was proving something right now that had nothing to do with signals work. Calloway's voice came back different now. The confidence was still there. It was too deep in him to disappear entirely, but underneath it was something she had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. All elements, we have a friendly shooter on the ridge. Repeat. We have an unknown friendly on the northern ridge. Do not engage the ridge. Repeat. Do not engage. Specialist Myers from somewhere inside the compound. Captain, who is up there? Did command send a... I don't know, Calloway said. And those 3 words from Ethan Calloway contained more honesty than he had probably intended to broadcast on an open frequency. 11 down. 16 remaining. Madison rolled her shoulders once, not relaxing, just releasing the specific tension that built up in the trapezius when you held a position under stress and found her next target. The fighters had started to adapt. They were good. She had known they would be. Whoever had set this trap had not recruited amateurs, and amateurs don't sit motionless in concealed positions for 6 hours, waiting for the precise moment to close a kill box. 2 of the remaining fighters had correctly identified the general direction of her position and were maneuvering toward the base of the ridge. Lily, she said. I see them, Lily said. 2 on your left approach. They're maybe 400 meters out and moving fast. Fast is sloppy, Madison said. They'll give me a shot. And if they don't, then you tell me when they're 200 meters out and we reassess. She kept working the main engagement while tracking the approaching pair in the corner of her awareness. A split-focus discipline that she had spent months developing the ability to maintain primary task while holding secondary threat in the margins of consciousness without letting either degrade the other. 12 down. 13. Calloway again. Hale, I need a status. A new voice answered. Myers. Captain Hale is down. He took a hit on the east approach. He's breathing, but he's not mobile. The words hit the frequency like a stone dropped into still water. Calloway absorbed it. 1 second. Maybe 2. Myers, can you reach him? Negative. I'm pinned on the north wall. I've got 3 fighters holding an angle on my position, and I cannot move without... He stopped talking, because the 3 fighters holding the angle on his position suddenly stopped being a problem. Madison had found them. 1, 2, 3. Myers came back on the radio, his voice doing something it had probably never done before on a tactical frequency. It broke, just slightly, just at the edges, but it broke. They're down, he said. Captain, those 3 are down. The shooter on the ridge just... He paused. Captain, I can't see who's up there. I can't see anything except... Move to Hale, Calloway said. Get him stabilized. Move. Yes, sir. 16 down. 11 remaining. Madison took her first real pause, 2 full seconds, and reassessed the entire field. The rhythm of the engagement had shifted. The enemy had lost their organized structure. The trap had become a scramble. Individual fighters were making individual decisions now, rather than executing a coordinated plan, which was both good and bad. Good because coordinated plans were more lethal, bad because individual decisions were less predictable. She identified the 3 highest threat targets based on their current positioning and adjusted her sequence accordingly. "Lily," she said. "The 2 on the left approach, where are they?" 300 meters, Lily said. "They stopped moving. I think they've found cover." "Describe their position." Lily described it. Madison processed it. The position Lily described gave the 2 fighters a viable firing angle on the ridge, not on her exact location, but close enough that if they were good shots, they were going to get lucky before she worked through the remaining 11. She needed to clear them now. "I'm going to shift left," she said. "Keep eyes on the main field." "I've got it." She repositioned small movement, controlled nothing that would break her cover, and found the first of the 2 approaching fighters. He was behind a rock formation, his head just visible at the edge. Just visible was enough. She fired. The second fighter broke from cover, immediately running left, the correct instinct to get away from the angle that had taken his partner, and she tracked him for 3 seconds before he reached new cover. He was fast. She waited. He had to breathe. He had to check his situation. He had to decide what came next. She waited. He moved. She fired. 18 down, 9 remaining. On the radio, Calloway was reorganizing his team with the grim efficiency of a commander who had been forced to revise his entire understanding of a mission in real time. He had Myers with Hale. He had Voss covering the south approach. He had the rest of his team in the compound working to secure Kareem Voss, the target. The reason they were all here, who had apparently retreated deeper into the structure when the shooting started. And he had an unknown shooter on a ridge above him, who had taken 18 enemy fighters, without his authorization, without his knowledge, and apparently without missing once. "Command," Calloway said on a separate frequency, his voice lower now, harder to read. "This is Iron Wolf Actual. I need an immediate identification of any authorized support element on the northern ridge of my current position. Repeat, I need immediate identification." The response from command took 12 seconds, which was long enough that Madison heard it from her position. "Iron Wolf Actual, we have no authorized support element on your northern ridge. Repeat, no authorized element. Please clarify." Calloway didn't respond for a moment, then understood. He switched back to tactical. "Team, listen up. Our unknown shooter is not an authorized element. That means we don't know who it is. It also means..." He stopped himself, recalibrated. "It also means that right now they are the reason we're still in this fight. So we protect that ridge. Nobody shoots toward the north. Nobody. Are we clear?" The team confirmed. Voss said, "Captain, do you have any idea who it is?" Calloway didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, that specific weighted searching pause from a man who always had answers, something shifted. Because Ethan Calloway was starting to think. Starting to pull at a thread he hadn't noticed before because he hadn't been looking for it. He was thinking about a manila folder he had never opened. About a warning he had not listened to. About a woman who had stood in the back of his briefing room and pointed at a ridge and said something he had already decided. Before she finished her sentence was not worth his attention. "Voss," Calloway said finally. "Where is Reed?" The question landed on the frequency like a hand grenade with the pin already pulled. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Because nobody had thought to track where the intelligence specialist went after she had been dismissed from the briefing and handed a communications patrol notation and told in all but those specific words that her job was to stay out of the way while the real soldiers did real work. "Voss," Calloway said again, and his voice had changed completely now. Something had moved behind it, not quite guilt, not yet, because guilt required a kind of stillness that was not available in the middle of an active firefight. But something that was going to become guilt later when there was time for it. "Find out where Reed is, right now. 20 down, 7 remaining." The third heavy weapons operator that Madison had noted, the one who had taken cover behind the stone structure on the eastern cluster, finally made his move. He repositioned toward a new angle, and Lily called it before he was halfway there. "Moving," Lily said. East Cluster, 3rd Heavy Weapons moving north. He's trying to get an angle on the compound. Madison found him mid-movement. Fired. 21 down, 6 remaining. She was working faster now, not because the situation demanded sloppiness, but because the remaining fighters had lost cohesion. Without coordination, without communication, without the organizational structure that had made them dangerous, they were individuals in the open. And individuals in the open, when you are a shooter who has had 18 months of the most demanding marksmanship training the United States military has ever run, are problems that have solutions. She worked through the next 4 in 2 minutes. 25 down, 2 remaining. The last 2 were the most dangerous, and not because they were the most capable. They were the most dangerous because they were the most desperate. Desperate fighters did unpredictable things, and unpredictable things had a way of killing people who had been trained to expect the expected. One of the 2 remaining fighters made a decision that Madison had not predicted. He ran toward the compound, not away, toward. She processed that in half a second. He was not retreating, he was not regrouping, he was going for the hostage situation, going for the high-value target, inside the building, attempting to either extract Kareem Voss, or more likely to use the team members inside as leverage. "Lily, I've lost the angle on the one moving toward the compound," Madison said, still tracking. "He's inside my dead zone. Tell Calloway. On it." Lily grabbed her own radio, a secondary unit she had brought on Madison's instruction, and keyed into the Iron Wolf frequency. "Iron Wolf actual. This is Lily Harper signals. I'm with your ridge shooter. You have one armed fighter moving toward your primary structure from the northeast, approximately 60 meters from your south entrance. He is not in the ridge shooter's angle. Repeat, he is approaching your south entrance. 60 meters. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough for Calloway to process that the voice on his tactical frequency belonged to Lily Harper, whom he also believed to be in the communications center, and that Lily Harper was apparently on a ridge somewhere above him, with a shooter who had taken 25 enemy fighters off the battlefield. Then his voice came back stripped of everything except the mission. "Voss, south entrance, now." Moving. Madison had already found the last fighter, the 27th positioned in the original northern cluster, the one who had not moved throughout the entire engagement, because he was either the most disciplined fighter on the mountain or the most frightened. Fear and discipline looked identical through a scope. It didn't matter which it was. She found him. She breathed. She waited for the specific moment, not the first clear shot, but the right clear shot, the one where the angle was clean and the margin for error was wide enough to guarantee a precise result. It took 11 seconds. She fired. 27 down. The mountain went quiet. Not the quiet of before. Not the held breath quiet of a trap waiting to close. Not the artificial stillness of fighters pretending to be part of the landscape. This was a different quiet. The quiet of a firefight that has spent itself entirely, that has taken everything it had and found that it wasn't enough. Madison stayed on her scope. She did not move. She did not celebrate. She swept the field once, twice, 3 times, looking for anything she had missed. Any movement, any position she had miscalculated. This was not paranoia. This was discipline. The worst moment to get sloppy was the moment when you thought the shooting was over. 3 sweeps. Nothing moved. She heard Calloway's voice on the radio, and it was the quietest she had ever heard from him. Not defeated Calloway was too constitutionally suited for command to ever sound defeated, but stripped down to something essential. Something she had not heard from him before. All elements report status. Myers. Hale is stable. Hit is in the left shoulder. He's conscious. He's going to make it. Voss. South entrance is clear. The fighter who was approaching is down. I've got him. A third operator inside the compound. Target Kareem Voss has retreated to a secondary room on the northwest side. He's got 2 of our men as leverage. He's demanding extraction. The mountain quiet broke open again. Not with gunfire. With the particular suffocating weight of a mission that was not finished. 27 fighters down. Hale breathing. The team intact. And Kareem Voss, the man they had come all this way to bring in, was now holding 2 of Iron Wolf's operators in a room and making demands. Madison heard it all. She stayed where she was. She felt Lily looking at her from the left. She didn't need to turn her head to know what Lily's face was doing. It was doing the thing faces do when a situation that was nearly resolved has just revealed another layer, another locked door, another test that nobody in the briefing room had mapped to a slide. "Madison," Lily said. "I know," Madison said. "What do you need?" Madison was already calculating. The northwest room. The angle from the ridge. The structural layout she had memorized from satellite imagery 3 days ago. The imagery that had been in the folder that Calloway had set down without opening the analysis that had been tabled, because the people making decisions had already decided who in that room was worth listening to. She ran the numbers. "I need Calloway to give me the interior layout of the northwest room," she said. "Specifically, I need to know if there's a window on the north-facing wall." Lily keyed her radio. "Iron Wolf Actual, this is Harper. The Ridge Shooter needs information on the northwest room. Specifically, is there a window on the north-facing wall?" Another pause. Longer this time. And when Calloway answered, his voice had something in it that Ethan Calloway had probably never broadcast on a military frequency in his entire career. He answered a question that came from a source he had dismissed. He answered it completely. Without hesitation. Without qualification. Without any of the particular condescension that had been present 6 hours ago in his briefing room when a woman in the corner had tried to tell him something important, and he had been too certain of himself to listen. "North-facing wall," he said. "Yes, one window, upper quadrant, approximately 4 feet by 3 feet. The room is approximately 12 by 14. If the target is using our men as cover, he'll be positioned against the south wall, which puts him 40 feet from the window," Madison said. She said it to herself, not into the radio. But it was the exact number Calloway gave her 2 seconds later. 40 feet. One window. One shot. One moment where every variable had to be exactly what she needed it to be, and the margin between the right outcome and an outcome that she would carry for the rest of her life was measured not in distance, but in fractions of angle of timing, of the specific trust you place in everything you've learned when the situation requires you to act on it completely. Madison closed her eyes for 2 seconds. She thought about her father, about his vegetable garden, about the way he had held her small hands around the stock of a rifle when she was 9 years old and said, "The bullet does not lie. The bullet goes exactly where you send it. So you had better know exactly where you want it to go before you decide to send it." She opened her eyes. She found the window. She breathed. And she waited for the moment that the mission required of her, the hardest moment, the one that no amount of training could make simple, the one that lived at the intersection of everything she was and everything she had decided every single day for the last 6 years to become. The moment when the only thing standing between the right outcome and the wrong one was the quality of a person's preparation, the depth of their patience, and the unshakable certainty that they had done the work in the dark alone, without recognition, without applause, without a single person in the building telling them they were worth watching. She had done the work. Now it was time to use it. The window existed. That was the first thing Madison confirmed, and confirmation meant everything. Not because she had doubted her satellite imagery, but because the difference between a plan built on analysis and a plan built on reality was the difference between a person who survived and a person who didn't. She had learned that early. She had never forgotten it. The northwest room. North-facing wall. Upper quadrant. 4 feet by 3 feet. 40 feet to the south wall where Kareem Voss was standing behind 2 Iron Wolf operators holding a weapon to the back of a man's neck and making demands into a radio with the particular confidence of someone who believed he had already won. He hadn't won. He had just stopped being easy. Calloway's voice came through the earpiece, lower now stripped of its operational formality, because the situation had moved past the point where formality served any purpose. "Harper, tell me your shooter can make that window." Lily looked at Madison. Madison was already measuring. Not with instruments, she had done the instrument work 3 days ago when she had studied the compound's blueprint inside the satellite imagery package that was now sitting unread in a manila folder on a briefing room table at Forward Operating Base Redstone. She was measuring with the thing that could not be calibrated or programmed or transferred from one person to another, The instinct of someone who had taken 1,000 shots in conditions exactly this difficult, and had learned slowly and painfully, and with absolute honesty about her own limits, exactly where those limits were. This shot was inside them. Barely, but inside. "Tell him yes," Madison said. Lily keyed the radio. "Confirmed. Your shooter can make the window." 3 seconds of silence. Then Calloway. "What does she need from us?" She. The word had shifted. It was the same word it had always been, she, her, the woman, but the weight behind it had changed completely. The way the same note played in a different key becomes an entirely different sound. "She needs you to keep Voss talking," Lily said, relaying as Madison spoke quietly beside her. "She needs the hostages to stay low if possible. She needs at minimum 90 seconds of stillness inside that room before she takes the shot. And if Voss moves the hostages," Madison spoke. Lily relayed, "then she adjusts." Another pause. Calloway processing. Making the calculation that every commander eventually had to make, the one where you stop being the most important person in the room and start being the person responsible for the people who are. "Tell her I trust her," Calloway said. Lily started to relay it. "I heard him," Madison said quietly. She pressed her eye to the scope and found the window. The angle was steeper than she preferred, which added a variable to the calculation that she had to account for precisely and could not approximate. Approximation at this range, at this angle against this target, with 2 American soldiers in the room, was not an option. It was not even a concept she allowed herself to approach. She ran the numbers again. Distance. Angle. Wind, which had shifted again, this time back toward the west, which was inconvenient, but manageable. Temperature drop, since she had last calculated, which affected projectile behavior in a way that most people would consider negligible, but that Madison Reed did not consider negligible because she had learned at great cost that negligible was a word used by people who had not yet paid the price of being wrong. Everything checked. Everything aligned. She breathed. She waited. Inside the compound, Calloway was doing the thing she had asked, keeping Voss talking. She could hear it on the frequency, Calloway's voice coming through the wall of the northwest room, via the radio that one of the hostages was carrying, the sound thin and distorted but present. "Kareem," Calloway said. His voice had the specific quality of a man performing calm he didn't feel, and performing it well. "You want extraction. Tell me where you want to go. We can talk about this." Voss the enemy. Voss Kareem, not Corporal Daniel Voss from Iron Wolf. A coincidence of surnames that nobody had found. Funny responded in accented English that was better than Madison had expected. "You don't negotiate, you take. That's what your people do. So I am telling you what will happen if you try to take here." "Nobody is taking anything right now," Calloway said. "Right now we're just talking." "Your men are very still," Kareem said. "They are afraid. Good soldiers afraid. This tells me you care about them." "I care about all of them," Calloway said. "Then give me what I ask." Calloway kept him talking. Madison kept waiting. She needed Kareem to be still for 90 seconds. Not moving, not shifting, not pulling a hostage in front of him as a reflex. 90 seconds of a man standing in one place, while she confirmed his position through a 4-by-3-foot window from a ridge in the Afghan mountains. 43 seconds in, Kareem moved. Not far. Not dangerously. He took 2 steps to his left, which changed his position relative to the window by enough that Madison had to recalculate, not start over, not abandon the shot, but adjust, rebuild the picture in her mind, realign the variables. She did it in 8 seconds. Lily was watching through the binoculars, tracking what she could see from the ridge angle. "He's still inside the window plane," Lily said quietly. "I know. The second hostage, the one on the left, he's trying to lower himself, slowly." Madison registered it. Good. Lower meant safer. Lower meant margin. "Tell Calloway the left hostage is cooperating," she said. "Tell him to keep Kareem focused on the negotiation. I need him looking at the door, not the window." Lily relayed it. 30 seconds later. Calloway said something to Kareem that made Kareem raise his voice, not in panic, in anger, which was actually better, Because anger is a focusing emotion. Anger narrows your attention. Anger makes you look at the source of the provocation and not at the north-facing wall behind you. Madison found her moment. It wasn't the perfect moment. It never was. The perfect moment was a fiction that people who had never taken a shot like this imagined existed somewhere out there, waiting to be found. Real moments were imperfect by definition. They were just the best available version of what you needed, and you had to be prepared enough and honest enough with yourself to recognize them when they arrived. She recognized it. She breathed out. She fired. The sound left the ridge and crossed the distance and entered the northwest room through the upper quadrant of the north-facing wall, and for one suspended moment that felt much longer than it was. Madison did not move, did not breathe, did not do anything except wait for information. Then Calloway's voice came through the earpiece. He said one word. Clear. Madison closed her eyes. She opened them. She swept the scope across the field one final time, the same discipline she had applied after the 27th fighter, the refusal to assume the work was done until she had confirmed it with her own eyes. And then she exhaled the breath she had been holding since she fired slowly, completely, until her lungs were empty and the mountain air rushed back in to fill them. Beside her, Lily made a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a sob, and was somewhere in the complicated territory between relief and something harder to name. Is he? Lily started. The hostages are clear, Madison said. Calloway said clear. That means the hostages are clear. Lily put her face in her hands for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put her hands back on the binoculars. Because that was who Lily Harper was. Below them, the compound had gone from the particular chaos of an ambush to the particular chaos of a mission in its aftermath. Operators moving fast, voices overlapping the radio traffic, dense with the logistics of securing a site, accounting for personnel, preparing for extraction. Hale was being moved to the primary room. The 2 hostages from the northwest were being checked by the team medic. Kareem Voss was no longer a problem. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Calloway was standing still. Madison could not see him from the ridge. But she knew with the certainty of someone who had been watching people closely for a very long time that Ethan Calloway was standing somewhere in that compound and doing the thing that people do when the version of events they had been operating under has just been conclusively replaced by a different version. He was reckoning. It took Iron Wolf Team 40 minutes to fully secure the compound and establish the extraction timeline. 40 minutes during which Madison and Lily stayed on the ridge because leaving the overwatch position before the site was confirmed clear was the kind of decision that got people killed in the last 5 minutes of a mission that had already cost too much. Madison spent those 40 minutes doing what she always did in the aftermath of a high-intensity engagement. She went quiet. Not the quiet of a person who was processing trauma. Though there was always something to process. Always anyone who told you otherwise was lying to you or to themselves. It was the quiet of a person who needed to account for every decision they had made in the preceding hour, to run through the sequence with honest eyes, and identify what had been right and what had been wrong and what could be better. She had made 28 shots today. 27 had been clean. One, the shot through the northwest window, had been by the standards she held herself to imperfect. Not in outcome. In execution. The angle adjustment after Kareem moved had cost her 6 seconds that she had not fully accounted for in her pre-shot calculation, which meant she had been operating partially on instinct in the final phase rather than entirely on mathematics. It had worked out. It had worked out this time. She filed it. She would carry it. She would not repeat it. Lily, lying beside her on the ridge, said, "You're going through the shot, aren't you?" "Yes." "The window shot?" "Yes." "It was perfect," Lily said. "It wasn't," Madison said. "The outcome was correct. The execution had a flaw." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Does anyone else in the world make that distinction right now?" "I do," Madison said. "That's enough." The extraction bird came in 43 minutes after the compound went quiet. Madison and Lily heard it before they saw it. The distant percussion of rotors cutting through mountain air. And then it was there. A heavy transport settling into a landing zone that the team had marked 500 meters south of the compound. They came off the ridge the same way they had gone up, carefully, quietly, without rushing. The terrain on the descent was worse than the ascent. In certain places it always was, because going down required a different kind of trust in your own balance, a willingness to commit your weight forward when every instinct told you to hold back. Madison made it down without incident. Lily slipped once, caught herself on a rock, swore under her breath, and kept moving. They reached the landing zone as Iron Wolf team was loading Hale onto the transport on a stretcher. I was conscious. Madison could see that from 30 meters away, could see his eyes tracking the sky above him, with the alert, slightly disbelieving look of a man who had been told the extent of his injury and was revising downward his estimate of how badly he had been hurt. She kept walking toward the bird. She was not looking for Calloway. She was not looking for anyone in particular, but she was aware, with the peripheral awareness, that was another thing she had developed to the point of near automaticity, of exactly where every person in her vicinity was standing and what they were doing. So she knew the moment Calloway saw her. She knew because the particular quality of stillness that came over him, a man in motion who suddenly stops, not because something has blocked his path, but because something has stopped him from inside, was a specific and recognizable thing. She had seen it before. She had learned as a woman who operated in spaces full of people who had underestimated her to recognize the moment when the underestimation collapsed. She had never enjoyed that moment. She had always thought she would. She had spent years imagining in the quiet of her own mind what it would feel like to be vindicated, to stand in the light of a moment like this one and feel the satisfaction of having been right. But the reality of it was different from the fantasy. The reality felt heavy. She was walking toward the transport bird, her rifle case in her left hand, and Calloway stepped into her path. He looked like a man who had rehearsed something, and then at the last moment realized that whatever he had rehearsed was completely inadequate for the actual situation he was standing in. "Reed," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. His jaw was set the way it always was, but the muscles beneath it were doing something she had never seen from him before, working against each other, pulling in different directions. The physical manifestation of a man trying to decide what kind of person he was going to be in this particular moment. "Captain," she said. "A beat." Calloway said, "The ridge." "Yes, sir." "The northern position, the one you flagged in the briefing." He stopped. "The one I tabled." "Yes, sir." Another beat, this one longer. The rotors of the transport were loud enough to fill the silence with something that wasn't quite silence, which was perhaps why both of them were able to stand in it for longer than they otherwise might have. "How long had you known," he said, "about the ambush position?" She considered being diplomatic. She decided against it because the moment was too honest for diplomacy, and because Calloway, whatever his flaws, had just told an unknown shooter on a ridge that he trusted her, and that mattered. 3 days. The movement patterns were in the analysis I submitted Tuesday morning. He absorbed it. She watched him absorb it, watched the specific sequence of a person integrating information that reordered their understanding of events they had already processed and filed as closed. "Myers," Calloway said finally, "in the compound, when the 3 fighters went down." He looked at her directly. His eyes were doing what eyes do when a person is trying to reconcile what they're looking at with what they thought they knew. He said he couldn't see who was on the ridge. "He wouldn't have been able to," Madison said. "I was positioned for concealment." "But you could see him?" "Yes." "The whole time?" "Yes, sir." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. It was not the look he had given her in the briefing room, the patient, slightly condescending look of a commander, acknowledging a subordinate's contribution before moving back to the real business of the room. It was something else entirely. Something that was working its way through him in real time, arriving at his face before it had fully arrived at his words. 27, he said. "Yes, sir." "In 5 minutes." 4 minutes and 53 seconds, she said. Then, the last cluster took longer than I'd planned. I had to adjust for a repositioning. The way he looked at her when she said that, the involuntary quality of it, the way it arrived on his face before he could manage it, told her that he had not yet fully processed what the past 4 hours actually represented. He was still in the operational layer, still in the part of his mind that processed events in tactical terms. The deeper layer, the layer where things like fairness and assumption, and the cost of being wrong about a person lived, was still catching up. "I need to debrief with command," he said. "Tonight. There will be questions about the unauthorized support element." "I understand." "I'll be the one answering them," he said. "Not you." She looked at him steadily. "Captain, that's not negotiable, Reed." His voice was firm, but it was a different firmness than before. Not the firmness of a man asserting authority over someone he considers beneath him, but the firmness of a man trying to do the right thing in the only way he currently knows how. "Whatever the program's official status is, whatever your file actually says. What happened today happened because I made a decision that I should not have made. I tabled your analysis. I put you in a position where unauthorized action was the only way to protect my team. That falls on me." She held his gaze. She had not expected that. She had expected the version where credit was reassigned and paperwork was adjusted, and the official record reflected something cleaner and less complicated than the actual truth of what had occurred on that mountain. She had prepared herself for that version. She had decided years ago that she was capable of operating inside that version without letting it diminish her. She had not prepared for this. "Calloway," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name without his rank, which was a line she crossed deliberately and noticed herself crossing. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I'm choosing to." A pause. "There's a difference." She nodded. He started to move toward the transport, then stopped. He turned back. "Who trained you?" he said. "My father," she said. "And then the program." "What program?" She looked at him for a moment. "The one in my file." He processed that. "The file I didn't read," he said. "The file you didn't read," she confirmed. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he nodded a single slow, deliberate nod, the kind that is not an acknowledgement of information, but an acknowledgement of something larger and harder to put into words, and walked toward the transport. Madison watched him go. Lily materialized at her left shoulder. The way Lily had been materializing at her left shoulder all day, appearing without announcement, because she had long since stopped requiring an invitation. "Well," Lily said. "Yes," Madison said. "That was." "Yes." Lily looked at her sideways. "Are you okay?" Madison considered the question honestly. The way she always considered things completely without shortcuts, without the reflexive reassurance that people offer each other in moments like this to avoid sitting in the actual feeling. "I will be," she said. It was the truest answer she had. Lily nodded, didn't push, didn't fill the space with words it didn't need. They walked toward the transport together, and Specialist Troy Myers, 24 years old, the one who had laughed in the briefing room, the one whose voice had broken on the tactical frequency when 3 fighters went down and he realized he was still breathing, was standing near the ramp. He saw Madison coming. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. What came out was not what Madison expected, and she had spent the walk down the ridge preparing herself for a variety of things that might come out of Troy Myers' mouth, because Troy Myers was 24 and had just been in his first real ambush. And people in that state say things that are authentic to the moment in ways that are not always comfortable. What he said was, "I heard your shots," from inside the compound. She stopped walking. I was looking at her with the particular expression of a young soldier encountering for the first time the specific truth that the world is not organized the way he assumed it was. "I didn't know it was you," he said. "I mean, I should have. I don't know why I didn't think—" He stopped himself. "I laughed, yesterday, in the briefing. I said—" "I know what you said," Madison told him. He flinched. Not dramatically, just a small internal flinch that moved through his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. It was not a complicated apology. It was not an explanation or a justification or a request for forgiveness packaged as an apology. It was just 3 words from a 24-year-old man standing on the wrong side of the most significant lesson he had yet received, and those 3 words were all he had. Madison looked at him. She thought about the 6 months she had spent walking through their corridors, carrying folders, maintaining systems, watching the way people looked at her, and decided what she was before she had a chance to show them. She thought about her father in his vegetable garden saying the person they don't watch is the person they never see coming. "Don't do it again," she said. "Not to me. Not to anyone." Myers nodded. It was the nod of a person who means it. She walked past him onto the transport. The rotors were spinning up when Calloway sat down across from her. Hale was secured on the stretcher between them, his eyes tracking Calloway's face with the alert gratitude of a man who knew how close it had been. The rest of the team filled the remaining seats, and the transport lifted, and the mountain fell away beneath them. And for a moment, Madison looked out at the ridge, where she had spent the most consequential 4 hours of her military career. It looked like every other ridge. That was the thing about the places where important things happened. They never looked important afterward. The mountain didn't know what it had witnessed. The ridge didn't carry the weight of it. Only the people did. She looked away from the window. Hale was watching her. He couldn't speak easily. The shoulder injury put pressure on his breathing in a way that made talking uncomfortable, but his eyes were fully present, fully aware, and they were directed at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with pain. She met his gaze. He raised his right hand, slowly, deliberately, with the effort of a man working around a significant injury, and placed it flat against his chest over his heart. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once. That was enough. The transport carried them down through the mountain air toward the base, and Madison sat with her rifle case between her feet and her hands flat on her knees. And she was quiet, though something large, not closed off, not retreated, but present in the specific way of a person who has done something that required everything they had and is now allowing themselves to simply exist in the evidence of it. Lily beside her fell asleep within 10 minutes. The deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone whose body has spent everything it had and is collecting what it's owed. Madison did not sleep. She sat with the mountain falling away beneath the transport and the team around her, and the particular truth that was still arriving in layers. The truth that doing the right thing in conditions where doing the right thing is invisible and unauthorized, and likely to cost you something, requires a kind of faith that has nothing to do with recognition, nothing to do with the opinions of the people around you, and everything to do with the standard you hold yourself to in the dark. She had met that standard. Not perfectly, but honestly, which had always in her experience been enough. The base appeared below them, and the transport began its descent, and Calloway looked across the hold at her one more time. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and she looked back, and somewhere in that exchange was the beginning of a conversation that was going to take much longer than a transport flight to complete. It was going to take, she suspected, a very long time. But it was going to be honest, and that after 6 months of being invisible was something. The debrief started at 2200 hours. Madison knew it was happening because she could see the light under the door of the command room from where she sat in the corridor outside her back against the wall, her rifle case between her feet, a cup of coffee going cold in her hand. She had not been invited into the debrief. She had not been told to wait outside it either. She had simply arrived at the place where the answers were being assembled and sat down because leaving felt wrong and pushing her way in felt premature. Lily had gone to check on Hale in the medical bay. She had offered to stay, and Madison had told her to go, and Lily had understood the difference between a person who wanted company and a person who needed to sit alone with the weight of what they had done. Lily always understood that difference. Through the wall. Madison could hear voices, not words, just the rhythm of voices, the specific back-and-forth cadence of a room full of people trying to establish the official version of events that had just departed significantly from the planned version. She recognized Calloway's cadence. She recognized the sharper, more clipped rhythm of someone senior to Calloway, someone who had traveled a long way in a short time and was not entirely pleased about the reason. She drank her cold coffee. She waited. The door opened at 22:47. Calloway came out first, and his face told her immediately that the conversation inside had been difficult in the specific way that conversations become difficult when the truth is inconvenient for everyone involved. He looked at her sitting against the wall and stopped walking. "They want to talk to you," he said. I expected that. I've told them everything." He said it with the particular weight of a man making clear that he had not protected himself at her expense. "The briefing, the analysis you submitted, the position I tabled, all of it." She stood up, picked up the rifle case. "How did they take it?" she said. Calloway almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "About as well as you'd expect." He stepped to the side to let her pass, then said quietly as she moved toward the door, "Reed." She stopped. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "you should know that I've told them this mission succeeded because of you. Not in spite of the situation. Because of you. That's in the record." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Captain." "Calloway," he said. She held his gaze. "Ethan," he said. And the word cost him something the way honest things always cost something when they arrive too late. She nodded once and went through the door. The command room held 3 people she recognized, and 1 she didn't. Colonel Patricia Wren, Iron Wolf's theater commander, sat at the head of the table, a woman in her 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of stillness that comes from decades of making decisions that other people have to live with. Beside her was Major David Cho, the unit's intelligence liaison, who had processed Madison's analysis reports for 3 months without once asking her a question about them. And at the far end of the table in civilian clothes that fit badly enough to make clear they were a costume rather than a wardrobe was a man she had never met. I was looking at her with the expression of someone who already knows the answer to every question he is about to ask. "Sergeant Reed," Wren said. "Sit down." Madison sat. "You understand why you're here?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's not waste each other's time." Wren's voice was flat and precise. The voice of a woman who had long since stopped performing patients she didn't feel. "You operated outside your authorized parameters today. You left your assigned position without informing your commanding officer. You deployed equipment that is not listed in your unit manifest. You engaged enemy combatants without a direct order to do so." A pause. "And because of those actions, every member of Iron Wolf team came home tonight. So we are going to talk about all of it." Madison waited. "Start with the ridge," Wren said. Madison started with the ridge. She told it the way she told everything, cleanly, without embellishment, without self-protection. The analysis she had submitted Tuesday. The movement patterns she had identified. The warning she had given in the briefing, and the decision Calloway had made to table it. Her assessment formed in the hours after the briefing that the mission would encounter the ambush at a specific location and a specific time. Her decision to position herself on the ridge before the assault began. She told it without making Calloway smaller. She told it without making herself larger. She told it the way it happened, which was the only way she knew how to tell anything. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then the man in the badly fitting civilian clothes said, "How long have you known about the program's evaluation parameters?" And the room changed, not physically, not in any way that an observer would necessarily see. But Madison felt it, the quality of the air, shifting the specific tension that enters a space when something previously unspoken becomes spoken, when the frame around a conversation suddenly reveals itself to be a different frame than anyone admitted it was. She looked at the man. "Since I was assigned to Iron Wolf," she said. "Another shift." Cho looked at Wren. Wren did not look at Cho. The man in the civilian clothes did not look at anyone. He was watching Madison with the focused, measuring attention of someone calibrating an instrument. "You knew you were an evaluation," he said. It was not a question. "I suspected it," she said. "I confirmed it approximately 6 weeks into the assignment." "How?" "The communication protocols for my secondary storage case didn't match the inventory codes assigned by Standard Logistics. The discrepancy was small. Most people wouldn't have noticed it." She paused. "I notice things." Something moved across his face. It might have been satisfaction. It might have been the recognition of a person who has been proven right about something they had argued for a long time. "My name is Charles Greer," he said. "I run the Precision Marksmanship Evaluation Program." She nodded. "You've known who I am," she said. "Yes." "Then you know what I'm going to ask." He settled back in his chair. Ask it. Was today a test, she said. The ambush, the hostage situation, all of it. Was it constructed? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a significant height. Ren's face went very still. Cho looked at the table. Greer looked at Madison for a long moment, and she looked back, and the silence between them was the kind that contains more information than most conversations. No, he said finally. The ambush was real. Kareem Voss was a real target. The fighters on that mountain were real fighters with real weapons and a real plan to kill your team. He leaned forward. What was evaluated was whether you would act, whether the conditions of the assignment, the dismissal, the invisibility, the repeated experience of having your expertise disregarded would cause you to disengage, to stop caring, to decide that people who don't respect you aren't worth saving. The words hit something in her chest that she had not expected to be hit, because she had thought about that question. Not today. Today, there had been no time for philosophy, only for mathematics and wind and the precise mechanics of keeping people alive. But in the months before today, in the quiet hours, when she had walked through Iron Wolf's corridors, carrying folders that nobody opened, and offering analyses that nobody used, she had thought about it. Whether it was worth it. Whether the discipline of caring about people who didn't see you was a virtue or a pathology. She had never arrived at a clean answer, but she had always arrived at the same action. You could have simply assigned me to a team that would have recognized my capabilities from the start, she said. Yes, Greer said. But you didn't. No. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because the question we needed to answer wasn't whether you could shoot. We already knew you could shoot. The question was what you would do with that capability when the people around you gave you every reason to withhold it. He paused. That question can only be answered in conditions that are real. We couldn't manufacture the dismissal. We couldn't manufacture the disrespect. It had to occur naturally, which meant assigning you to an environment where it was statistically likely to occur. Another pause. We were not wrong about Iron Wolf's response to your assignment. The room was very quiet. Madison sat with everything Greer had just told her, and she did what she always did with new information. She ran it through honestly, without the filter of what she wanted it to mean, looking for the true shape of it. What she found was complicated. She had been used. That was part of the true shape. She had been placed in a situation designed to be difficult, assigned to people who had been selected because their biases were predictable, and observed the way you observe something in a controlled experiment with detachment, with instruments, with the expectation that she would behave in a way that proved or disproved a hypothesis. But she had also been trusted. That was the other part. She had been selected because someone believed she was capable of carrying the weight of that situation and acting correctly within it. Not because it was easy, because it was hard. What happens now? She said. Ren spoke for the first time since Greer had identified himself. That's what we're here to determine. She folded her hands on the table, a precise, deliberate gesture. Officially, you operated outside your authorized parameters. That requires a response. I understand. Unofficially, Ren continued, and something shifted slightly in her voice. Not warmth exactly, but the adjacent territory. You saved the lives of 8 American soldiers using a skill set that your commanding officer had been given access to and chose not to use. She looked at Madison directly. Those two things exist simultaneously. What we decide tonight will have to account for both of them. Greer said, my recommendation to this command as of this evening is that Sergeant Reed's evaluation be marked complete and successful, that her file be updated to reflect her full classification, and that she be offered a position within the program as a primary field evaluator. The offer landed in the room quietly. Madison looked at him. A field evaluator, she said. You'd be doing what you've been doing, Greer said. Operating within units that have specific capability or culture problems. Identifying gaps. Demonstrating what's possible when those gaps are closed. He paused. Except you'd know going in. No more pretending. No more folders nobody opens. She sat with that. The offer was real. She could feel its realness, the weight of it, the shape of it, the specific gravity of a door opening in a place where she had been pressing against walls for a long time. She thought about the corridor outside this room, about the 6 months of corridors before it, about the particular exhaustion of being competent in places that couldn't see you, and the particular loneliness of that exhaustion, and the way it accumulated over time, in a way that was different from physical exhaustion, deeper, slower to repair. She thought about what it would mean to walk into a room knowing for the first time that the room knew who she was. She thought about Lily. "I need to ask you something," she said to Greer. "Go ahead." "Corporal Harper. She was with me on the ridge. She's listed as an unauthorized element in whatever report this room is generating right now." She looked at him steadily. "She went up that ridge because she decided to. Nobody assigned her to. Nobody told her to. She made a choice based on her own assessment of the situation, and she performed at a level that—" Madison paused, choosing words carefully. "She's the reason I had eyes on the full field. She spotted for me the entire engagement. Without her, the sequence would have taken longer, and people might have died while I was recalculating." Greer looked at her. "You're advocating for her," he said. "I'm accurately describing her contribution," Madison said. "The advocacy is a consequence of the accuracy." Something moved across Greer's face that might in the right light have been respect. "Harper's record will reflect her actions accurately," Wren said. "Both the unauthorized element classification and the operational contribution." She looked at Madison. "That's the best I can do for her tonight. The rest depends on how her own command responds." Madison nodded. It wasn't everything. It was something. She was learning to hold both of those at the same time. The debrief continued for another hour. The operational details, the sequence of engagements, the shot data, the assessment of the enemy's tactical preparation, the intelligence failures that had allowed an ambush of that sophistication to be assembled without detection. Madison answered everything completely. She did not soften the intelligence failures which implicated Cho's office as much as Calloway's tactical decision-making. She did not perform modesty about her own performance, because modesty in an after-action review was a form of dishonesty that served nobody. When it was over, Wren stood and the room stood with her. "Reed," Wren said. "Ma'am. Get some sleep." A pause. "That's an order." Madison almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She walked out of this command room and into the corridor where Calloway was no longer waiting because it was past midnight, and Calloway had a team to account for, and a wounded operator to check on, and the 10,000 tasks that fall to a commanding officer in the aftermath of a mission that almost became something much worse. The corridor was empty. She stood in it for a moment, her rifle case at her side, the weight of the last 12 hours settling into her body. The way weight settles when you finally allow it to all at once. Suddenly with a heaviness that is not unpleasant, because it is the specific heaviness of something completed. Her radio crackled. Lily's voice. "Medical Bay. Hale is asking for you." Madison looked down the corridor. She started walking. The medical bay held 4 beds, 2 of them occupied. Hale was in the bed nearest the door, his left shoulder wrapped and elevated his color better than it had been on the transport. The other bed held one of the 2 hostages from the northwest room, a specialist named Aaron Cross, who had taken a blow to the head during the initial capture and was being monitored for concussion. Lily was sitting in the chair beside Hale's bed. She looked up when Madison came in, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who had spent the last hour in a room with a man who had been asking questions that Lily didn't feel it was her place to answer. Madison crossed the room and stopped at the foot of Hale's bed. He looked at her. Dominic Hale was not a man who dealt easily in emotion. She had understood that within the first week of the assignment. He processed everything through action, through movement, through the particular grammar of a person who was most fluent in doing and least fluent in feeling. His face in repose was the face of a man who had learned early that vulnerability was a liability and had spent decades constructing a personality around that belief. I was looking at her now with something that had gotten past the construction. "Calloway told me," he said. His voice was rougher than usual, pain and medication doing their work. "About the briefing, about what I said." She waited. "I said it," he confirmed. You analyze maps, we fight wars. He said it back to her flat without inflection, without the casual dismissal that had been in his voice the first time. The second time, it sounded like what it was. I said it. Yes, she said. I've been saying things like that my whole career, he said. To a lot of people, not just you. He shifted slightly against the pillow, and his jaw tightened with the effort. I never thought about what it cost them. I thought it was just the way things were, the way they should be. She pulled the chair from beside Cross's bed and sat down. What changed? She said. You saved my life, he said. That would do it for most people. Some people get saved and find a reason to resent it, she said. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Some people do. A pause. I'm not going to be one of them. She believed him, not because she was naive about the durability of conversion experiences. She had seen enough of human nature to know that the person Dominic Hale was in a hospital bed at midnight, stripped of everything except the bare truth of what the day had cost him, might be a different person than the one who would walk back into the world when the shoulder healed. People reverted. Comfort restored the habits that crisis stripped away. But she believed him in this moment, and this moment was real. You don't owe me anything, she said. That's not how it works. I didn't save you so that you'd feel indebted. I know, he said. I saved you because you're my team. Something moved through his face when she said that. The word "my" landing on him with a weight he clearly hadn't expected, because she had been assigned to his unit for 6 months, and in those 6 months he had never once thought of her as belonging to the same team he belonged to, and the fact that she thought of it that way, regardless the fact that she had gone up a mountain for people who hadn't earned it, was doing something to him that he didn't have words for yet. He would find the words eventually. Some people did. She stood up. Sleep, she said. Shoulder injuries feel worse on the second day. You're going to need the rest. He almost laughed. It came out as something between a laugh and a sound of pain. Reed, he said as she turned. She turned back. In the compound, when the 3 fighters went down. Myers, he got on the radio and his voice. Hale stopped, made himself continue. I could hear what it did to him, to all of us, not knowing who was up there, not knowing if it was real or if we were losing our minds. He held her gaze. And then Calloway asked where you were, and I knew. She looked at him. You knew before he asked, she said. Yeah. What did it feel like? He thought about that honestly. Like finding out the person you underestimated, he said, was the only reason the story didn't end there. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she walked out of the medical bay and into the corridor, and the door closed behind her, and she stood alone in the particular quiet of a base in the middle of the night when the machinery of military life had slowed to its lowest register, and the people inside it were sleeping or trying to sleep, or sitting in rooms with questions they didn't know how to answer yet. She walked to the equipment room, not because she needed to, because it was where she went when she needed to think had been going there for 6 months, and the habit was honest, even if the reasons behind it had shifted. She set the rifle case on the workbench. She opened it. She began the cleaning process, not because the rifle needed it urgently, but because cleaning a rifle after an engagement was a discipline, a ritual, a way of accounting for what the weapon had been asked to do, and returning it to the state it needed to be in for what might come next. She was 20 minutes into the process when the door opened. She didn't look up. The footsteps told her who it was. Calloway sat on the supply crate across from her, the same crate Lily had sat on the night before, which already felt like a different era. The debrief, she said without looking up. Done. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Wren is writing the formal assessment tonight. Cho's office is going to take some significant heat for the intelligence gap. Greer is submitting his evaluation report to the program. He paused. And I'm being required to complete a bias assessment training module. He said it without complaint, without irony. Flat. Like a man accepting the exact consequence he'd earned. She looked up at that. That's new, she said. Apparently it's been in the pipeline for a while, he said. Today just moved up the timeline. He held her gaze. It should have been in the pipeline longer ago. She went back to the rifle. Greer made me an offer, she said. I know, he told me. She looked up again. He told you, she said. He said he was extending it. He asked me what I thought. Calloway's jaw worked for a moment. I told him it was your decision. He agreed. But he still asked you. Yes. She let that sit for a moment. The fact of it that Greer had asked Calloway that Calloway's opinion had been solicited, as though it were relevant that even in the moment of offering her something. The architecture of the system still ran its consultations through the people she had already proven wrong. It would take a long time to change. That was the honest truth of it. Not today, not with one mission and one debrief and one commanding officer sitting on a supply crate at midnight trying to find the right words. It was going to take a long time, and it was going to be imperfect, and the imperfection was going to be costly in ways that couldn't always be measured. She knew that. She had always known that. It hadn't stopped her from coming to work. What are you going to do? Calloway asked. She ran the cleaning rod through the barrel one more time. I'm going to think about it, she said. Tonight I'm going to clean my rifle and sleep, and tomorrow I'm going to check on Hale and make sure Lily's paperwork is handled correctly. She set the rod down. Then I'm going to think about it. He nodded. I was quiet for a moment, in the way of a person with something to say that isn't ready yet. She recognized the quality of it had developed a sensitivity to the specific rhythms of people approaching honesty, and she let it have the time it needed. I've been in this unit for 4 years, he said finally. I've run 37 missions. I've made a lot of decisions under pressure, and I've been right about most of them. He looked at the floor between them. I don't have a lot of experience being wrong. Not wrong in a way I had to look at directly. He raised his eyes. I don't know how to... He stopped, started again. I don't know the right way to account for what I missed. She looked at him for a long moment. You can't account for it retroactively, she said. You can't go back and open the folder. You can't untable the Ridge assessment. She kept her voice even, not cold, not punishing, but honest in the way that honesty is its own form of respect. The only place accountability exists is forward. What you do with the next folder, the next briefing, the next person standing in the back of your room saying something you haven't decided yet is worth your time. He absorbed it. She went back to the rifle. She reassembled it with the same quiet efficiency she had always brought to everything, the same patience, the same precision, the same refusal to rush the parts that needed time. When it was done, she held it for a moment, the weight of it, familiar and real. The instrument of everything that had happened today, reduced back to its mechanical truth, clean and ready and waiting. She set it back in the case. She closed the latches. Calloway, she said. Yeah, go sleep. She picked up the case. Tomorrow is going to be a long day, and you need to be sharp for Hale's follow-up, and the team debrief, and Wren's formal review. She looked at him steadily. Your team needs you thinking clearly. That hasn't changed. He looked at her. In his face was the complicated arithmetic of a man recalculating who he was in relation to, who he'd thought he was doing that work in real time, in front of a person who had every reason to make it harder than it needed to be, and was choosing not to. Reed, he said. Go sleep, she said again. He went. She stood alone in the equipment room for a long moment, after his footsteps faded her hand on the rifle case, the night pressing against the walls around her, with the particular weight of a place where significant things have happened, and the air still holds the impression of them. She thought about Greer's offer. She thought about her father's garden. She thought about Lily on the Ridge binoculars, up voice steady, choosing to stay with her eyes open. She thought about 27. The number sat differently now than it had on the mountain. On the mountain, it had been a sequence, a calculation, a series of problems solved in order. Here in the quiet of the equipment room, it was something else. It was the number of times a person who had been told she didn't belong on the battlefield had made the only argument that ever actually mattered. Not a speech, not a complaint, not a folder of analysis on a briefing room table. A result. 27 results. She picked up the rifle case. She turned off the light. She walked out into the corridor and the base was quiet around her. And somewhere in the medical bay, Hale was sleeping, and Lily was probably asleep in the signals room, and Calloway was walking toward his quarters, with more on his mind than he'd had when he got up this morning, and the mountain was still out there in the dark, indifferent and real, holding none of what had happened on it because mountains don't hold anything. People did. She walked to her quarters. She set the rifle case against the wall. She sat on the edge of her bunk, and for the first time since she had pressed her cheek against the stock at 4:30 in the morning and watched the first light of an ambush beginning to move below her, she let herself be still, completely still. The kind of still that requires you to stop being a soldier, stop being an evaluator, stop being the person in the room that nobody is watching, and just be the person inside all of those things. The person her father had raised, the person who had chosen every single day for 6 years to train in the dark. She was tired. She was glad to be tired. She lay down. She closed her eyes. And the darkness that came was the clean, uncomplicated darkness of a person who has spent everything they had on the right thing and is finally honestly allowing themselves to rest. She slept 4 hours, not because 4 hours was enough. It wasn't, and her body knew it wasn't, but because at 05:30, her mind came back online with the abrupt, complete alertness of a system that had been designed to restart quickly, and lying in the dark, pretending otherwise was a form of dishonesty she had never been able to sustain. She sat up. She went through the same sequence she went through every morning. Hands first, running over the rifle case in the dark to confirm it was where she had left it. Then feet on the floor. Then the deliberate grounding act of sitting still for 60 seconds before she stood. Her father had taught her that too. He called it the first decision of the day, the choice to be present before you were anywhere else. She was present. The base was already moving when she stepped into the corridor. The particular early morning energy of a military installation. The day after a significant operation, heightened, purposeful. Every person walking a little faster than usual, because yesterday had reminded them of the specific speed at which everything can change. She went to the medical bay first. Hale was awake, sitting up against the headboard, eating something from a tray with the focused displeasure of a man whose appetite was present, but whose patience for institutional food was entirely absent. He looked up when she came in, and his expression did the thing. It had done in the transport, that involuntary rearrangement, the face catching up to something the mind had already processed. "You look terrible," he said. "4 hours," she said. "Sit down." She sat. He pushed the tray to the side, which was clearly a relief to both of them. "Calloway was here at 6, he said. "He told me about Greer, about the offer." She looked at him. "News travels. It's a small base." He adjusted his shoulder carefully. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know yet." "What's holding you back?" She considered how much of the honest answer to give him, and then decided that the full honest answer was the only one worth giving, because Hale had been honest with her last night in the most unprotected way he probably knew how to be, and that deserved reciprocity. "The offer is to keep doing what I've been doing," she said. "Operating in environments where the problem is what people assume about each other. Identifying the gap. Demonstrating what's possible." She paused. "But knowing in advance this time." "That sounds better," Hale said. "In some ways," she said. "In other ways, knowing in advance changes what you're doing. Right now, everything I did on that mountain, it was real. I wasn't performing capability. I wasn't running a demonstration. I was just doing what the situation required because the situation required it." Hale was quiet for a moment. "And if you take the offer," he said slowly, "you're worried it becomes something else." "I'm worried the line gets blurry," she said, "between what I'm doing and what I'm showing people I can do." He looked at her for a long moment. "Reed," he said, "with respect, that line was never as clear as you think it was." He shifted against the headboard, carefully managing the shoulder with the practiced carefulness of a man learning the new geography of his own body. "The whole time you were here, you were showing us something. You just weren't performing it. You were being it." He met her eyes. "Greer's offer doesn't change what you are. It just changes who gets told about it first." She sat with that. It was not the argument she had expected from Dominic Hale. It was also not wrong. You should sleep more, she said. You should make a decision, he said. She stood up. I'll consider both, she said. She walked out of the medical bay into the corridor and almost walked directly into Specialist Troy Myers, who was coming the other way, with 2 cups of coffee, and the expression of a man who had been rehearsing something for the last several hours and was not entirely confident in his delivery. He stopped. She stopped. He held out one of the cups. She took it. They stood in the corridor for a moment, the two of them, with the particular awkwardness of people navigating a relationship that has been permanently reordered by events and hasn't yet found its new shape. I talked to my sister last night, Myers said. On the sat phone. She's an ER nurse, has been for 7 years. He looked at the cup in his own hand. I've never once asked her about her job. Not really. I've asked her how she's doing. I've asked her about her kids. But I didn't ask her what it was like, what she actually does. He looked up. I called her last night and I asked. Madison looked at him. What did she say? She asked. She talked for 40 minutes, he said. She cried twice, and she said, he stopped and something moved through his face that was 24 years old and completely genuine. She said nobody ever asked before. The corridor was quiet. Nobody ever asked, he said again quieter. Madison looked at this young man. This boy really, because 24 was still a boy in the ways that mattered. Still at the beginning of understanding what he didn't understand and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Tenderness. The particular tenderness of watching someone begin a lesson that is going to make them better than they were, and knowing that the beginning is always the hardest part. Call her again, Madison said. Not in a week. Not when you remember. Tomorrow. He nodded. And Myers, she said. She already knew what she was worth. The question was whether you were going to find out. She kept walking. She drank the coffee. It was better than the stuff from the machine, which told her he had gone somewhere specific to get it, which told her the gesture had been deliberate, which told her that some things when they broke in, a person broke in the right direction. She found Lily in the signals room, which was not a surprise. Lily's relationship with sleep had always been complicated, and the signals room in the early morning was her particular version of what the equipment room was for Madison, the place where she thought, where she processed, where the noise of the world reduced to a frequency she could manage. Lily had a headset around her neck and a half-eaten protein bar on the desk beside her, and the look of someone who had been awake since 4 and was running on the specific fuel of unfinished thoughts. She looked up when Madison came in. Ren's report went up the chain at 0400, she said immediately. I heard from Cho's admin. Madison sat down. And it's being reviewed by people above Ren's pay grade. Lily set the headset on the desk, which apparently includes someone from the Joint Chief's office. She paused. Greer's evaluation report went up with it. Madison absorbed that. How did your paperwork come out? She said. Lily made a face that was trying to be neutral and not quite succeeding. Unauthorized element citation is in my record. So is the operational contribution notation. She shrugged. My direct CO he's not happy about the unauthorized part. He's also very specifically not asking me to explain my reasons, which I think means he's read the full report and understood what the context was, and doesn't know how to officially approve of what I did while officially noting that I did it without authorization. That's the job, Madison said, holding both things at once. Wonderful job, Lily said dryly. Very comfortable. She looked at Madison directly. What about Greer's offer? Everyone knows about Greer's offer. Small base, Lily said. Exactly what Hale had said, which meant the information had moved through the unit overnight, with the efficiency of something nobody was officially discussing, but everyone was finding a way to mention. I'm thinking about it, Madison said. Lily leaned back in her chair. Can I tell you what I think? You're going to either way. True. Lily crossed her arms. I think you should take it. Not because it's safe, or because it's the smart career move, or because Greer's program deserves the benefit of your cooperation. She held Madison's gaze. I think you should take it because you are the best person I have ever watched do what you do, and the program puts you in the places where that matters most. And the alternative is... She paused. The alternative is you spending another 6 months somewhere, being invisible to people who haven't earned the right to see you yet. Except this time you're doing it alone without even knowing why. Madison looked at her. "You'd come with me," she said. It wasn't a question. Lily blinked. "What?" "If I take the offer, you'd come with me." Madison kept her voice level. "Greer needs spotters. He needs signals. He needs people who can stay composed on a ridge at altitude while someone takes 27 shots and 2 enemies are moving up the left approach." She tilted her head slightly. "He needs you, Lily, and I need you. Those 2 things are both true, and neither of them cancels the other." Lily stared at her. "I haven't been evaluated," Lily said. "You evaluated yourself yesterday," Madison said. "On the ridge. The result was definitive." Lily was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that means a person is standing at the edge of something they hadn't seen coming and is deciding whether the ground on the other side looks solid. "You'd have to ask Greer," Lily said finally. "I know. He might say no." "He might? And you're going to ask him anyway?" "Yes," Madison said. "First thing I'm going to do is ask him." Lily looked at her desk, at the headset, at the half-eaten protein bar, at the small accumulated evidence of 6 months of being exactly where she had been assigned and doing exactly what she had been told competently and without complaint in the invisible way that support personnel learn to be invisible because the alternative is being seen as a problem. She looked back at Madison. "Okay," she said. Just that. One word. But she said it the way people say things when they mean all the weight behind them and not just the surface. Madison stood. "Finish the protein bar," she said. "You need it." She went to find Greer. Howe was in the small administrative office that had been assigned to him for the duration of his time at the base, a room that suited him. She thought in the way that sparse functional spaces suit people who have long since stopped requiring comfort as a condition of doing their work. He was on a SAT call when she knocked. He looked up, saw her, and ended the call with the efficiency of someone accustomed to interruptions of uncertain importance. She came in. She sat down across from him without being asked, which she understood he would read correctly as a signal about the nature of the conversation she intended to have. He read it correctly. "You've made a decision," he said. "I have conditions," she said. Something in his face moved. Not surprise exactly because she suspected Greer had long ago stopped being surprised by her, but a kind of forward lean in his attention, the posture of a person who is about to hear something they find genuinely interesting. "Go ahead," he said. "Lily Harper comes with me," she said. "Not as support staff, as a full operational partner. Her evaluation is whatever she demonstrated on the ridge yesterday, and if that's not sufficient for your program standards, I'd like to hear your specific objection." Greer looked at her for a moment. "That's one condition," he said. "That's the primary one," she said. "The secondary ones are operational. I want full briefing on the evaluation parameters before any assignment. Not the target unit's culture assessment. I can read that myself. The program's specific questions, what you're trying to learn, what the success metrics are." She held his gaze. "I'm not walking into another 6 months blind. I did that once because the situation required it. I won't do it as standard operating procedure." "Those are reasonable conditions," Greer said. "I know they are," she said. "I'm not asking for your approval of their reasonableness. I'm stating them as the terms under which I accept the offer." He looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Then he said, "Harper is in." She had not expected him to concede it that quickly. She didn't show that. "The briefing condition," she said. "Also acceptable." He leaned forward. "Read, this program has been running for 11 years. In that time I have had 12 evaluators go through the full training and field cycle. Of those 12, 4 remained with the program beyond their initial assignment." He looked at her steadily. "Of those 4, none of them came to me the morning after their evaluation with conditions." "What did they come to you with?" she said. "Gratitude," he said. "Relief. Questions about what came next." He paused. "You came to me with terms." "Is that a problem?" she said. "No," he said. "It's the reason I recruited you." He stood, held out his hand. "Welcome to the program, Sergeant Reed." She stood, she shook his hand. And somewhere in the act of that handshake, the clean, direct mutual acknowledgement of an agreement between two people who understood each other with precision, something that had been tightly wound inside her for a very long time, began quietly to release. Not everything, not at once, but something. The formal review convened at 1000 hours. In the main briefing room, the same room where 6 months of briefings had happened, where the table still held the ghost of a manila folder that nobody had opened. Colonel Wren presided. The full Iron Wolf team was present minus Hale, who was represented by his medical status, and the empty chair that Calloway had placed deliberately at the table, rather than removing it. Madison sat at the table for the first time. Not against the wall, not in the corner with a folder against her chest. At the table. Greer sat to her left. Lily, who had been formally notified of her provisional status in the program 40 minutes earlier, and had responded by finishing her protein bar and changing into a clean uniform with an efficiency that suggested she had been ready for something like this for longer than she had admitted, sat to Madison's right. Wren opened the review without preamble. This review covers the operational events of yesterday's Iron Wolf mission, the unauthorized support actions taken by Sergeant Reed and Corporal Harper, and the program evaluation context that informs the full assessment. She looked around the table. "We are not here to assign blame. We are here to understand what happened and ensure that what happened informs what happens next." A pause. "Those are different things. I expect this room to hold that distinction." She looked at Calloway. "Captain Calloway has already submitted his after-action assessment," she said. "It is, in my estimation, one of the more honest documents I have received from a unit commander in my career. It will be noted as such in the formal record." Calloway did not respond. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes forward, and the particular stillness of a man who has said everything he needed to say and is now prepared to live in the consequences of having said it. Myers beside him was very still. Voss across the table was looking at Madison with the expression of a man trying to reconcile multiple versions of the same person. Wren moved through the operational review with the precision of someone who had done this many times and understood that the difference between a review that produced change and one that produced paperwork was the quality of the honesty in the room. She did not soften the intelligence gap. She did not soften the briefing room failure. She did not soften the chain of assumptions that had placed 27 enemy fighters between Iron Wolf team and survival, and relied on a woman they considered support staff to close that gap. She said it plainly. And the room sat with it plainly. When she reached the evaluation component, she turned to Greer, who gave a summary of the program's findings that was precise and without flourish, the kind of summary that lands harder for its lack of decoration. "The evaluation of Sergeant Reed's assignment to Iron Wolf team is complete," Greer said. "The program's finding is that the unit demonstrated the specific bias patterns the evaluation was designed to measure, and that Sergeant Reed's response to those conditions demonstrated the character and operational capability that warranted her recruitment into the program." He paused. "The program's additional finding, unanticipated, is that Corporal Harper's independent decision to support the Ridge operation represents a level of initiative and operational composure that meets the program's field partner criteria." Lily, to Madison's right, breathed very carefully in and out. It was the only movement she made. Wren then said the thing that the room had been waiting for in the specific way rooms wait for things they know are coming, but need to hear officially before they become real. "The formal record of this unit will be amended to reflect the full operational contributions of Sergeant Madison Reed and Corporal Lily Harper. Their classification status will be updated accordingly." She looked at Madison directly. "The record will also reflect that both women were present at the mission briefing in which the Northern Ridge assessment was presented and not acted upon. That assessment, had it been acted upon, would have materially altered the mission parameters and reduced the risk to the unit." A pause that had weight in it. "The record will reflect that." The room was very quiet. Then something happened that Madison had not anticipated. Calloway pushed back his chair. He stood up. Iron Wolf team looked at him. He was looking at Madison. And Ethan Calloway, Captain United States Army, 4 years in command, 37 missions, the most naturally certain man she had ever been in a room with, placed his right fist against his chest, over his heart. The same gesture Hale had made from the stretcher. He held it there. Then Myers stood. Then Voss. One by one, the men of Iron Wolf team rose from their chairs with their fists against their chests, and the room held that image. These soldiers, these decorated, capable, complicated men, standing in the most honest silence Madison Reed had ever been inside. She did not look away. She held it. All of it. The weight of 6 months of invisibility. The weight of 27 shots. The weight of a manila folder and a tabled briefing, and the particular cost of being competent in rooms that weren't ready to see you. The weight of her father's hands on hers when she was 9 years old, teaching her to hold still. She held it, and then she nodded. Once. The way she always nodded when a calculation was confirmed. When the review formally closed, and the room began the careful, slow work of returning to the world outside the briefing. Calloway found her in the corridor. He was carrying something. She saw it before she registered what it was, a small flat object in his right hand, the size and shape of a challenge coin. He held it out. She looked at it. Iron Wolf's unit coin. The kind that commanders gave in recognition of exceptional service, not of formal commendation, not a medal, not something that required paperwork and signatures and the machinery of official acknowledgement. Just the specific direct currency of one soldier to another. "You saved every person on that mountain," he said. She took the coin, turned it over in her palm. "Calloway," she said. "I know," he said. "You didn't do it to prove something." "No," she said. "You did it because they were your team." She looked up at him. "They were," she said, "even when they didn't know it." He held her gaze for a long moment. "They know it now," he said. She closed her fingers around the coin. The rest of that day moved quickly in the way that days move when the significant thing has already happened, and everything after it is the legitimate, necessary human work of processing what that significant thing means. She filed the operational reports. She met with the program's administrative team to begin the formal transition to her new role. She sat with Lily for an hour in the signals room, while Lily talked through what the provisional status meant for her current assignment, her current record, and the life she had been building inside a job description that had just been permanently expanded. Lily talked the way she always talked when she was working something out fast. Circular, doubling back, following the thread of an idea until it ran out, and then picking up a different thread. Not because she was confused, but because thinking out loud was how she confirmed what she already knew. Madison let her talk. When Lily finally ran out of threads, she sat back and said, "I'm scared." "Good," Madison said. Lily looked at her. "Fear means the thing is real," Madison said. "Real things are worth being scared of. It's the things that don't scare you that you should worry about." She paused. "You'll be fine. Not because it'll be easy. Because you know who you are when it's hard." Lily was quiet. "You saw that on the ridge," Madison said. "I didn't tell you. You didn't tell me. It just showed up in the moment because it was already there." She looked at her steadily. "It was already there, Lily. That's what yesterday proved. Not that you could do it, that you already were." The thing that moved across Lily's face was not quite relief, and not quite pride, and not quite something else. It was recognition. The particular expression of a person being shown an accurate image of themselves for the first time. At 1700, Madison went back to the equipment room. She had not planned to. She had planned to go to her quarters, finish the sleep. Her body was still requesting prepare for the following day's work. But her feet took her to the equipment room, the way feet sometimes take you to the places where you've done your most honest thinking, before the rest of you has decided it's necessary. She sat on the workbench. She did not open the rifle case. She just sat. The equipment room was quiet. The base around her was doing its evening work, the particular rhythm of a military installation, settling into its nighttime register voices. Lower movement, slower. The machinery of the day, winding toward the temporary pause of sleep that allowed it to begin again tomorrow. She thought about her father. She did this less than she used to thought about him actively, deliberately sitting somewhere and constructing the memory of him the way you construct a fire piece by piece until it gives off heat. She used to do it constantly. In the early years when she was still calibrating the distance between who he had taught her to be and who the world was willing to accept that she was, she had needed the fire of his memory to keep warm. She needed it less now, not because he mattered less, because she had become enough of what he'd built that it sustained itself. He had been a quiet man. Not silenced quiet by choice, quiet in the way of people who have determined that the words they use should be worth the air they displace. He had spent 40 years saying things that mattered and leaving everything else unsaid, and he had died with a garden and a rifle and a daughter who had inherited both. She thought about what he would say about today. She thought about it for a long time. And what she arrived at sitting alone in the equipment room at the end of the most significant day of her military career was not the dramatic statement she might have scripted for him. Not the formal acknowledgement. Not the expression of pride that the moment seemed to call for. What she arrived at was simpler. He would have said, "You did the work. The work showed." That was it. That was everything. The door opened. She looked up. Greer. He came in without the hesitation of a person seeking permission, and without the aggression of a person asserting authority. Just the directness of someone who had somewhere specific to be and had arrived there. He sat on the supply crate. "I have your first assignment," he said. She looked at him. "That was fast," she said. "The need doesn't wait for our timeline." He crossed his arms. "There's a unit in Germany. Ranger Battalion. Exceptional combat record. Significant documented culture problems around gender integration and the treatment of support personnel." He held her gaze. "They have a female logistics officer who's been flagging equipment failures for 4 months. Nobody's listening. 3 weeks ago, one of those failures contributed to a training injury." A pause. "The officer is still there, still filing reports, still not being heard." Madison sat with it. "What's her name?" she said. Greer told her. She filed it. "When do we leave?" she said. 10 days, he said. "That gives you time to close out here, complete the program onboarding, and bring Harper up to speed on the operational parameters." He stood. He was almost at the door when she said, "Greer." He turned. "The officer in Germany," she said. "She's still filing reports after 4 months and a training injury that she predicted. She hasn't stopped." "No," he said. "She hasn't." "Why do you think that is?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because some people," he said, "are built in a way that doesn't allow them to stop doing the right thing just because the right thing isn't being received." He looked at her steadily. "You would know something about that." She held his gaze. "Tell her we're coming," Madison said. "Not officially, not through channels. Just find a way to tell her that someone is coming who will hear what she has to say." Greer looked at her for a long moment. "That's not standard protocol," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's the right thing." He held the look for one more beat. Then he nodded. He left. Madison sat alone in the equipment room, and the base settled into its night around her, and she held the Iron Wolf unit coin in her palm and turned it over once, twice, feeling the weight of it. The way she felt the weight of everything, honestly, completely, without pretending it was lighter than it was. 27 shots. 1 mountain. 6 months of being the person in the room that nobody was watching. And now, for the first time, a room of her own choosing. She set the coin on the workbench. She opened the rifle case. She began the maintenance sequence, not because it was needed, but because the discipline of it was the discipline of everything. She was patient, precise, honest about the work, committed to being ready before the moment required readiness, rather than after. Her father had taught her that. The work you do when no one is watching is the only work that tells the truth about who you are. She had done that work. In the dark. In corridors, where people looked through her, in briefing rooms, where her voice disappeared before it reached the ears. It was meant for in the quiet hours before dawn, when the only person who knew what she was capable of was herself. She had never stopped. Not when they laughed. Not when they tabled her analysis. Not when they handed her a communications patrol notation, and told her in all but those specific words that her value to the mission was limited to keeping the radios alive. She had never stopped because stopping was the only version of the story where she lost. Everything else, the dismissal, the invisibility, the 6 months of being the woman they never looked at twice. Everything else was just the conditions inside which she had continued to be exactly who she was. And exactly who she was had proven on a mountain in Afghanistan in 4 minutes and 53 seconds to be the most important person on the battlefield. Not because she had wanted to prove it, because it was true. She closed the rifle case. She stood up. She turned off the light. And Madison Reed walked out of the equipment room and into her future with the same quiet certainty she had carried onto the ridge. Not loudly, not with performance, not with the need for anyone to see her leaving or understand where she was going. Just forward. The way she had always moved. The way warriors move who have nothing left to prove and everything left to do.